Situated deep in the remote forests of the Karelian wilderness, on the eastern side of the Finnish-Soviet border, we find a rock formation known as Mount Vottovaara. But there was something strange about this Mountain of Victory, as the name roughly translates to. The highest mountain in the region, its silhouette cut stark against the twilight sky, shrouded in an eerie mist, a mist that curls like spectral fingers around what appear to be ancient stone formations. Large, unbelievably heavy boulders, clearly shaped by man and carefully balanced atop smaller stones thousands of years ago. Dozens of these now lie weathered and pitted with age, scattered across the mountain slopes in curious formations that, perhaps like the ancient pyramids, defy explanation. Still further, among these silent stone sentinels are the crooked trees, twisted and gnarled as if contorted by unseen forces. The ancient pine trees in the area, around 122 years old, are only 2 meters tall, which is considered abnormally short for their age. Many of the lakes dotting the surrounding area are also quite perplexing. The locals refer to them as dead lakes, because there is nothing alive in them, fish or otherwise. So what is it that makes this mountain so unusual? Among the Sami people, the indigenous natives, Mount Vottovaara is whispered to be a portal, a gateway to other realms, a threshold between worlds, where the fabric of reality is at its thinnest. Sacred rites are still observed by those who remember the old ways, paying homage to the spirits that are believed to dwell on the mountain. Many visitors report a profound sense of isolation and quiet when exploring Mount Vottovaara. Some say they can sense a palpable shift in the air, a chill that seeps into the bones, and a sensation of being watched by unseen eyes. And in the deepening winter of 1939, as the Red Army launched a full-scale offensive across the Karelian border into Finland, what would become known as the Winter War, these Russian men appear to have discovered a terrifying truth about these ancient beliefs. Perhaps this is merely a story of an ordinary mountain where an unusually vicious pack of wild animals somehow slaughtered an entire company of heavily armed Russian soldiers. Or perhaps, in the nature of all things unexplained, it is something else. This is the story of Vottovaara, the mountain of death. The mist which hangs before you
offers you a choice
to pass through
or to escape.
Beyond it are
Stories
which defy
the explanation
and fly in the face.
of what we know to be real,
It is a void of both
reality
and impossibility.
of both fact
and superstition.
You alone are left to discern
what to believe as you pass through what we call the fog of war.
On September 1st, 1939, the world was again plunged into global conflict. With tensions in Europe once more reaching a boiling point, the forces of Nazi Germany crossed into Poland, provoking the Allied powers of Britain and France to declare war on their old foe. The Soviet Union, at this point in cahoots with Germany thanks to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, also partook in the conquest, attacking the already overwhelmed Poles from their eastern border. As part of this agreement, the two regimes would avoid hostilities and divide the conquered spoils between them. However, the Soviets were rightfully wary of their lofty German allies. Should Hitler turn his military against the Soviet Union, Stalin sought to reinforce the vulnerable Leningrad area against any push from German-occupied territory. The Karelian Isthmus, then a part of the sparsely populated nation of Finland, was seen as the ideal place to make such a push. The Finns, long fearful of any sort of Soviet expansionism, shot down every Russian attempt to negotiate the transfer of territory. On November 1st, 1939, the Winter War would thus commence with a bombardment of the Finnish capital, Helsinki. The country of Finland was, at this time, a sparsely populated land of merely 4 million people, characterized by its beautiful temperate forests, lakes, rivers, marshlands, remote settlements, and harsh winters. Finland and its lightly armed troops found themselves squared up against the might of the Red Army. The Soviets attacked across the Karelian Isthmus with 14 divisions, totaling about 450,000 men, including thousands of tanks, artillery pieces, and aircraft. The Finns, on the other hand, while mustering a large force of reservists, couldn't hope to match the numbers of the Soviet armor and air forces. To any Soviet general comparing the numbers of the opposing forces, a swift, effortless victory seemed virtually guaranteed. However, any student of history will tell you that hubris is no stranger to the battlefield. Almost immediately, the advancing Soviet forces were beset by logistical problems presented by both the harsh winter as well as the unique Finnish landscape. Between its remote towns and few small cities, Finland is largely dominated by dense woodlands, the only way through them often being one or two winding roads, now buried under feet of snow. Though largely outgunned, the Finnish troops were incredibly resourceful and used their familiarity with the terrain to effectively combat the densely packed Soviet formations. Perfectly camouflaged within the snow-dusted woods and armed with a familiarity in marksmanship, outdoor survival, and skiing developed since the earliest days of boyhood, the Finnish troops turned these narrow paths into kill zones. The average Soviet soldier, on the other hand, was generally ill-prepared for the nature of winter warfare. Aside from being poorly trained, equipped, and led by incompetent officers, many of the Red Army soldiers weren't even issued a proper winter coat. In an environment that regularly saw temperatures drop as low as -45 degrees Fahrenheit, many of these men would be claimed by frost instead of Finnish bullets. Despite the ferocity of the Finnish resistance, the Soviets, through overwhelming numbers and sheer tenacity, gradually advanced in the Karelian region. With their slow, tedious push into Finnish territory, the Soviets came into contact with not only the Finnish civilians who had yet to evacuate, but with the indigenous Sami peoples, well-rooted in Karelia. Long predating the modern states of Europe, the Sami peoples are indigenous to Scandinavian and Nordic countries. Their nomadic populations spread amongst Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. The Karelian region in particular hosts a plethora of archaeological evidence tracing the presence of ancient Sami peoples as far back as 8,000 years. Much at odds with their Christian Finnish counterparts and the unwelcome arrival of their communist neighbors, the Sami held firm to their ancestral beliefs. While one could label their religious outlook as something akin to paganism, a more accurate description of Sami faith would be that of animism. A subform of shamanism, the Sami believed that all of Earth's physical elements, from its animals, rocks, and plants, possess a life force all their own, a divine soul worthy of reverence and respect. The Sami people lived hand in hand with the natural world around them, believing wholeheartedly that if they respected the earth and its many entities, they in turn would be rewarded with nature's bounty. However, as it was, and is the tragic reality of so many indigenous peoples, the Sami, their way of life and beliefs, were scoffed at on both sides of the battle line. For nearly 2 months, the Soviet forces, while making incremental gains, had endured a humiliating stalemate at the hands of a stout, numerically inferior Finnish defense. Now, in late December of 1939, and marginally better prepared for the tactical and environmental situation, the Red Army sought to launch fresh offensives into the Karelian region west of the Kala River. In order to get eyes on the Finnish lines in the area, the Soviets looked to secure an elevated position from which they could recon the enemy defenses. With an elevation of 1,369 feet, giving it a commanding view of the surrounding area, The mountain of Vottovaara seemed like the ideal candidate for an observation post. However, when speaking with the local Sami people, far better acquainted with the territory than their occupiers, the Russians were met with concerned looks and a series of ominous warnings. Vottovaara, they said, was an evil place. In stark contrast to the surrounding landscape, covered in a lush expanse of temperate forest, life, it seemed, had a strange aversion to Vottovaara. The mountaintop plays host to a desolate ecosystem, one that even the lowly insects seem to avoid. Ugly, mangled trees force their way through the earth, their branches twisted and gnarled by the hand of an unknown influence. The scattered ponds and small lakes nearby the mountain are likewise devoid of any life, failing to host anything from tadpoles to seaweed. Vottovaara's most interesting, or perhaps unnerving, feature, however, comes in the form of many intricately cut, perfectly balanced rock formations known to the Sami as sedas. With their faith largely anchored around worshiping the natural world, the Sami believed that such prominent rock formations served as dwellings to powerful entities. With the mountain playing host to numerous sedas, and at least at one point finding itself at the intersecting point of reindeer and fish migrations, it is believed that Vottovaara was once a very sacred place, a holy ground where Sami people, in preparation for the hunting and fishing seasons, would appeal to the gods, both in prayer and ritual sacrifice. If satisfied, the gods would bestow good fortune upon the hunters. The spirits that dwelled upon Vottovaara, so said the Sami, didn't take kindly to outsiders. If the Soviets didn't plan to respect the very earth they were to ascend, the Finnish troops would be the very least of their problems. Unsurprisingly, the Soviet officers paid little attention to the folklore of what they interpreted to be an archaic, backwards way of life. With orders to establish an observation post from which they could observe the Finnish lines, a company of 100 men from the Soviet 8th Army set out ahead of their main force. With the mountain's elevation giving it a commanding view of the area, at least one tactically competent Soviet officer must have had this nagging thought. Given their close proximity, why hadn't the Finns chosen to garrison the heights of Mount Vottovaara? Since early man started to develop the first battle tactics, taking the highest point in the battle space has always been seen as a cardinal rule in strategy. So why were the Finns okay with letting them secure the area's highest vantage point, completely unopposed? Regardless of whether their decision was tactical or otherwise, the Finns, dug in nearby, watched as the Soviet troops meandered their way atop the high ground looming over them. With many Sami men and descendants having volunteered or having been conscripted into the ranks of the Finnish army, the significance and lore of the mountain before them was by no means lost. As they willingly gave away the elevated position to their opponents, the Finns, perhaps for the first time in the history of warfare, were glad to be looking up at their enemy. And one cold night, as the low winter sun dipped below the horizon, their feelings were soon validated.
Oh, you always make it too strong. I make it the way I like it. Quit your belly aching. If I drink this muck you made, I will be belly aching. Then I'll be truly insufferable. Is this you being tolerable? Bite me. I bet the Reds have better. Hi. What the hell? Who the hell is that? Do we have people over there? No, I don't think so. The captain ordered us to stay put.
Despite Finnish leadership ordering their troops to hold in place at the bottom of the mountain, Their lines were roused by what sounded like a brutal confrontation playing out atop Vottovaara. Cutting through the eerie stillness of the night, gunfire, explosions, and screams of panic echoed from the mountaintop. It sounded as if chaos had broken out within the Soviet position. The unhinged spraying of guns and lobbing of grenades wasn't meant for the Finns, but for a threat that was somehow in and amongst the Soviet troops. For 2 consecutive nights, the Finns listened as the Soviets did battle with an unknown enemy, their screams and gunfire ominously waning with each passing hour. Finally, at some point on that second night, the mountain fell silent. With dawn mercifully breaking over the horizon, the Finns, perplexed by the unruly behavior of their enemy, decided that it was time to get eyes on the Soviet position. Setting out across no man's land, a small Finnish scouting party advanced towards the looming slopes of the mountain, beginning their cautious ascent to its peak. As the scouts slowly but steadily made their way up the mountain face, a complete lack of security, or any sign of enemy activity in general, set the men's nerves on edge. Where were the Soviet observation posts or snipers? The telltale signs of lumbering equipment, shovels breaking ground, and officers barking orders. Surely, now being so close to the peak, they draw some unwanted attention, or at the very least, hear the unaware enemy going about their business. But according to their journal entries, that wasn't the case. Save for the wind howling through the dead trees and looming stones, Vottovaara was unnervingly quiet. Gripping their weapons tight, the scouts prepared for the final steps that would take them atop the mountain plateau. What they discovered would only deepen the mystery in a most horrifying, stomach-churning way. The Finnish troops had located their enemy, what was left of them anyway. All 100 men had been massacred over the expanse of the mountaintop. The blood-splattered scene painted a grisly image of fear and desperation. In their final moments, some of the Soviets looked as if they had attempted to flee before being struck down. Others, more disturbingly, still firmly clutched the firearms with which they had taken their own lives. As horrifying as it sounds, it looked as if they were the lucky ones. The majority of the Soviets met their end not by gunfire or explosives, but by what the Finns could only guess were the claws and fangs of a voracious predator. Few of the Soviet bodies were fully intact, with severed limbs and various innards scattered carelessly amongst the mangled trees and sacred stones. Shimmering in the morning sun, countless brass casings further signified the desperation of the Soviet defense. Despite their panicked resistance to whatever attacked them, the scouts found no indication of Finnish casualties or the presence of friendly troops anywhere on the mountain. Someone, or perhaps something, had, with animalistic bloodlust, ripped an entire company of armed men to pieces atop Mount Vottovaara. The grisly fate of the Recon company atop Mount Vottovaara fell to the wayside in the wake of renewed Soviet offenses in the area during the latter half of December. While the Finnish army and air forces would continue to fight the Red Army with great tenacity, the numerical and material advantages held by the Soviets would gradually wear down their stout defense. 3 months later, in March of 1940, Finland would ultimately yield to Soviet demands, surrendering much of the Karelian region to the Soviet juggernaut. In June of 1941, Hitler would betray the non-aggression pact still in place between the Nazis and Soviets. As Operation Barbarossa drove German armies deep into the Russian motherland, Finland, now receiving direct military aid from Germany, launched its continuation war against the Soviets. While reclaiming much of its native land from their enemy, Soviet advances in 1944 would see the Finns again pushed back to their 1940 borders. Now, with Karelia firmly in Soviet hands, an uneasy peace settled over the vast, remote region. To the Sami people, Vottovaara will always be a sacred and holy place, worthy of the utmost respect. But to the Russians who now occupied the region and were aware of the mountain's history, a new moniker was coined: Death Mountain. As it stands today, Vottovaara is seen as a sort of hidden gem for Russian hikers, explorers, and paranormal enthusiasts. Given its remote location, access to the mountain is quite difficult. However, should one persevere in their trek, they'll be treated to the many odd, remarkable sights of Vottovaara's unique geography. Little, if anything, remains to attest to Vottovaara's wartime history and its associated myths. However, that certainly hasn't stopped the flow of reports detailing the mountain's various phenomena, paranormal or otherwise. Some even go so far as to state that Vottovaara itself is a portal between dimensions. So where does this leave us with this particular mystery? Did a supernatural force residing atop the mountain really massacre an entire company of Russian troops? Or, if such an event did occur, could a much more earthly, though equally terrifying culprit be responsible? On both sides of the Winter War, large packs of Eurasian wolves were an ever-present concern. At best, the animals were a mere nuisance, constantly drawn to the smells of cooking meat or rations radiating from the battle lines. However, those familiar with the reports of wolf attacks during the frigid winter campaigns of European wars will be well aware of just how dangerous these animals can be when their desperate hunger finds them settling for a new kind of prey. With the battle lines often intersecting with regional reindeer migration routes, is it possible that with their usual prey being driven away by the oncoming war, the wolves, now prowling about their usual hunting grounds on empty stomachs, decided to settle for human flesh? Often traveling and hunting in packs of up to 24, a determined group of hungry wolves could certainly inflict casualties upon an unsuspecting, inexperienced group of Soviet conscripts. But a well-armed company of over 100 men? Given the horrific degree of damage found upon the bodies of the Soviet troops, it has also been suggested that the company crossed paths with a larger sort of predator. The brown bear is a common sight across Eurasia and North America. While they are not known to be territorial, brown bears may feel inclined to act in a more aggressive manner should they be competing for a food source. Likewise, their temperament towards humans is often unpredictable. Though such animals will usually go to lengths to avoid human contact, should they find themselves caught by surprise or otherwise threatened, brown bears are known to attack with vicious intent. Should a mother bear be acting in defense of her young cubs, there are arguably few, if any, forces in Karelia that would be able to stop her rampage. However, be it an angry bear or a ravenous pack of wolves, surely there would be an overwhelming surplus of evidence detailing such an attack. Footprints, feces, dead bodies of the attacking animals, or other indications would almost certainly be littered all over the grisly scene. Eerily enough, this was reportedly not the case. The Finnish men who ascended Vottovaara, each with a lifetime's experience of hunting and tracking, couldn't find a single piece of evidence detailing the involvement of any known animal. The Mystery of Death Mountain is a little explored tale in the realm of wartime oddities. After all, when said event takes place in the shadow of mankind's largest and most terrible conflict, it's easy for things to get swept under the rug. While it certainly wasn't uncommon for entire companies of men to be wiped out or vanish during the dark, frigid days of the Winter War, the Vottovaara incident certainly lends itself well to theory and speculation, both grounded and outlandish. So, What did kill those men atop the desolate mountain plateau? A hungry pack of wolves willing to settle for human meat? A bear protecting its young? Or perhaps something as rational as renegade Finnish troops taking matters into their own hands? None of these truly seem to fit the scene described, something that attacked the men over a period of 2 days. Something so horrible it would lead men to fire wildly while screaming, and to fearfully take their own lives as they watched their comrades being ripped apart. If we allow ourselves to consider it, perhaps it was the very thing the Sami people warned the Soviets of just before setting off on their fateful trek up the mountain. Perhaps the presence of so many men, foreign to the mountain's sacred grounds, offended something far more terrifying than even wolves or bears. Or we might conclude a possible combination of spiritual and natural forces. In the realm of native lore, even in Christian scripture, and in the scope of the Sami's ancient beliefs, the possession of animals by spirits is not at all unheard of. Sami legends consist of many strange entities that are interestingly consistent with other ancient natives from other continents. Things like giants. And there was another unnatural being they speak of, something they call Stalu, a being that possesses the ability, they say, to change its appearance, to take on the form of either human or animal. Something other native cultures might translate to skinwalker. Hey guys, thanks for sticking around for the after action here. Well, there is not much of an after action on this one. I really, after reading through this story, kind of looking over whatever I could find about this particular mountain, it's obviously, I don't know if it's like a Stonehenge kind of thing, right, with these rock formations. It's got a lot of significance with the local natives, the Sami people. You know what? One interesting thought is that I never really gave it any thought that there would be native people living in Scandinavia in the way that the Native Americans are considered native people. So that was an interesting point to learn in the making of this story. And to consider that they have very similar legends, and potentially these things are tied to interactions that their ancestors have had in the past with entities or creatures or things like that. Again, just very interesting, in the same way that you can have two different people serving in two different militaries, different countries, let's say, reporting having similar experiences in different parts of the world, whether it be spiritual, these sort of creature experiences, UFOs, other things like that. Just very, very interesting, and I'm sure we may explore this in future with other cultures. With the more of these sort of weird stories and weird encounters that we explore, the more I get a rounded sense that a lot of these things might be the same thing. As far as diversity is concerned, these are the same entities being seen in different locations around the world. It's just entirely contingent upon the country where they're being seen, that it's being given a different name or a different description or identity. So again, very interesting. But that being said, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for the next episode. We've got some exciting news coming, and I hope you guys are looking forward to more stories as we get more people involved with the production process and helping speed all this up. A huge shout out, as always, to my supporters, Patreon, YouTube channel members, people who support the channel through buying merchandise and other ways. You guys have been a huge help getting us to this point, so thank you so much. I sincerely appreciate your ongoing support. May God be with you no matter what you are dealing with, and I will see you in the next episode.